Here we go.
Okay.
Some of this might be bad. I don't know, but I'll just do it.
That's what the podcast mantra is, Ralph. Some of this might be bad, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Welcome to... It seems like Godard's mantra as well. Welcome to MoveTube. This week we return to our 4-part Jean-Luc Godard season. We've done his 60s new wave classics, we've done his painful protest propaganda, and now we're steering into his mid-career. Through the 80s and early 90s, Jean-Luc Godard made a feature film pretty much every year. When we meet him in this era, he's in his 50s, settled down with partner and frequent collaborator Anne-Marie Mieville. He's balding, like, very correct observation.
Yeah,
and he's still got plenty to say. Prenom Carmen from 1983 throws two tortured lovers into a botched bank robbery subplot. Carmen retreads some of the criminal antics of his new wave classic Bande Apart, but he swaps the Hollywood mimicry for a more elegiac approach. Prenom Carmen's simple storyline leads us into a luscious image perm of savage seas, monstrous motorways, and a renewed, more anguished lust for flesh, while Beethoven's best string quartets bubble beneath. Hail Mary is a classic bit of conception core. Godard's Virgin Mary is a bashful basketball player sliding out of the clutches of her cock-blocked boyfriend Joseph. It's at the petrol station where she works that the angel Gabriel blesses Mary's belly with a messianic bump. Explaining all this to a boyfriend with blue balls in a society of skeptics nearly takes her over. Hélas pour moi is an absolutely insane movie that makes no sense, but it is strangely compelling.
Yes, the end.
There are parables, there is a collage of conflicting voiceovers, and an undercurrent of desire and lost memory. And crucially, it's in Owen's top 10 films of all time.
It is.
Owen joins me as ever. Do these films reveal the ripening of a tumescent talent? Or, Owen, are they merely a muddled midlife mishmash?
Wow, that's incredible. That was a really leading question, but a fantastic introduction. I feel like you've put me on the spot in the kind of limelight because you said it. Hélas pour moi, Hélas, oh woe is me, is in my top 10. Yes, I think the interesting thing to say about Godard at this period is that he's come fresh off the boat of revolution. He's just stepped off the battleship Potemkin. He's gone through a period where he threw his kind of, his aesthetic principles or kind of like conventions of filmic and cinematic beauty and genre completely under the bus. His cinema of the revolutionary period.
See previous episode
was messy, technicolor, kind of splurged, bright. It was like poster paint. It was film in poster paint. Yeah. Often shot very cheaply. This is a return to, in a way, the kind of cinema circuit. It's kind of a return to the fold. And today, I shared that link to that Paul Verhoeven, his kind of Benedetta, his kind of late career return to film. It's a very kind of trad, anguished film about nuns and sex and desire. And it's shot in a very non-exploitation, bit of les-exploitation. It's shot in a very conventional way. It's very beautiful. There's often a thing where directors, as they reach kind of midlife and beyond, kind of try to make a legacy statement in their film, and they might become more traditional. And in a way, Godard does this during this period, because one thing that connects these films is the sublime and God. These are religious films, whereas in the kind of 70s he was looking squarely at the superstructure. He was looking at Lenin and Marx and Mao. He's now literally looking at not just God in a kind of capital G theistic sense, but in a Greek mythology sense, which is Hélas pour moi.
What about the 60s films? How do they compare in terms of their focus?
Their focus is on genre. Their focus is on film. That's a filmmaker wanting to make film. I think it's that simple. Bending genre to his own will. Science fiction, the rebellious movie that you talked about. Bande Apart. Romance has always been present in Godard's films. But the key thing for this period, is say 83 to 93. That's kind of like 10-year period. Is that his, for the first time really, his protagonists are human. Actually, even though he retains, I'm sure we'll talk about it, he retains the angular, asynchronous, and kind of noisy nature of his filmmaking that he learned in the 60s and 70s, that his characters are more human. They have their dialogue is more tender, their emotions are more real. There's a return to kind of composition and framing which might be considered beautiful, but they're still identifiably Godard films, not least because Prenom Carmen, Godard is a character in the film. A film director who is trying to stay in a mental hospital. He claims to be mad, and they're trying to kick him out because he's maybe not mad. That's
classic position of the artist.
Classic position of the artist wants to be that rails against society, wants to be called a madman. They say he's not a madman. It's interesting. So for me, that's how I would kind of draw the wagons around these films and say they are human. They're much more focused on humanity, the human condition. They're linked, as you alluded to with Blue Balls, they're linked to desire and frustrated desire and the anguish of desire, consummated and unconsummated. There's still a concern with film and the making of film. Film is a question about film, but they are much more human and beautiful in the way that Bout de Soufflé was beautiful. Maybe more so, actually. They're probably his most beautiful films.
They hark back to Le Mépris for me.
Yeah. Actually, no. The Mépris I'd almost forgotten about.
Highly constructed beauty. Aiming at the sublime, using repetition to elicit a kind of spiritual experience. Using the boundaries of the start and the stop of the take. And the boundaries of what is in the frame, what is in the diegesis of the film, to stimulate intrigue and curiosity and excitement.
You're right.
Depth.
He's more diegetic here than he ever has been, and the non-diegetic still plays a part. The kind of misaligned shot with voice and music, you still get these bursts of classical violins and Dvorak.
Well, let's talk about Prenom Carmen.
The first of the three that we're going to look at, which is 83. I said it because he uses these shots of a quartet playing one of the string quartets by Beethoven, and that's the non-diegetic music, and then it becomes diegetic when you see this quartet, who aren't part of the main narrative at all, but part of the film is watching them repeatedly rehearse. But let's talk, because I'm very conscious that these are very underseen films, and they're not widely available. I mean, we watched these on torrents. I don't think you can parody.
I don't think you can really see these on Amazon Prime or whatever.
No, you don't see them screened either. I did a cursory little browse through BFI player, and it's the Godard we know is the Godard of the 60s, and that's how history has framed him.
Terrible, because not terrible. They're good films, but it's terrible that this era is so neglected. But specifically, these three films, I think they're three of Godard's most interesting films. Prenom and Hail Mary, in my opinion, are two of his greatest.
Yes, easily.
Hélas pour moi as well, but
differently so, because Hélas pour moi is more typically like an embodiment of Godard, the experimental filmmaker, whereas Hail Mary and Prenom Carmen are more traditional films that still carry through. I'd say Hail Mary is the film that would most, if you came onto the scene with Hail Mary as your debut or whatever, this would be the start of a striking new voice in art house cinema.
It's an interesting one.
This would be your Berlinale film.
People say this about Bob Dylan, that his he has to work so much, and Leonard Cohen as well, their later work, if this was a new artist, it would be a breakthrough, but it's just
for them,
it's just a genius doing another quite genius thing.
It's wheeling out another. although talking about Hail Mary, because Hail Mary came with a storm of controversy. Godard. It's very easy to say Godard is a controversial filmmaker, but how controversial were Breathless? How controversial was Weekends? It was feeding a story to a revolutionary, as it were, audience, young metropolitan
Hail
audience.
Mary really put the cat among the pigeons.
It really did, because this is a story of the Immaculate Conception of Joseph and Mary, set in 80s Switzerland. Mary works at a gas station, or lives at a gas station with her father who pumps gas. Her boyfriend Joseph is this layabout dropout who drives a taxi and looks a lot like Godard in the sense of he's got these sunglasses all the time. The kind of controversy that was caused by the film, I think partly was a profane retelling of a holy story in France, a very Catholic country, and it was told a story where Mary was not a willing vehicle for the body of the Saviour. She's an unhappy and uncomfortable body. Joseph is not the follower necessarily he is, because he really wants to fuck. He's so down to fuck, and most of the film is him about her negotiating her body with him. That's really
there are these amazing moments of touch. I mean, it's one of the hardest things to talk about in an audio format, but like the way that he moves his hand towards her belly, and she says no, not like that, and he says I love you and touches her belly, and she doesn't like it, and then only when he says I love you while pulling away does she sort of accept his touch. It's like only in pulling away is your touch accepted. And that, that's just very haunting. I mean, it's so the use of gesture in all of these films, in all of them, even Hélas pour moi, these are films where Godard's use of gesture really comes into its own. I want to talk about three key elements, like the use of gesture, which I think is absolutely profound and extraordinary, and
it never was before in Godard.
It takes on this. I mean, there are amazing bits in Breathless with the smacking of the arse and funny little details, but in these films, gesture is
phenomenological cinema.
Gesture enters the sublime in these films. The way he uses touch and movement and looking, and that bit at the end of Hail Mary where she's deciding whether or not to put the lipstick on. I mean, we'll talk about it. The significance of that scene later, but that use of gesture, absolutely extraordinary. The second thing is intertitles, which I think it's Godard's weirdest thing. Intertitles. I don't really know why he uses intertitles so much.
They're the most characteristic part of a Godard film. They're so characteristic. They're probably the least talked about part of a Godard film.
But they do so little for me. I really want to throw that out there. I don't really know. I think all of Godard's films would be just as good without him fanning around with intertitles.
I completely screw that. But these films reject his more extreme use of intertitles from the 60s and even early 70s. They don't play such a decisive role. I hear you, because remember, for a large part, Godard was interested in the language of film. He was interested in semiotics. He's interested in visual film as a language. And he wanted to deconstruct that language. He was interested in how language as spoken and written language could also be deconstructed in order to convey and break apart messages that you were receiving as a viewer. And that's kind of Godard's thing, right? That's his bag. So intertitles play a really key role, in early silent film. If you're watching Murnau or something, it's the intertitle tells you what's kind of about to happen, or is telling you what is happening or is about to happen, and it's another way from breaking the conventions of cinema while bringing it back to its filmic roots. It's a very essential part of cinema, but they also disrupt because they remind you that this is a story. It reintroduces narrative, it reintroduces the mythic into his films, and I think in Hail Mary is a very pared down version of that, and when we see Prenom Carmen, it's a very pared down version of that. We see very little of it in Prenom, but in Hail Mary we get at that time, which is this repeated refrain.
That's the only intertitle really. It's just at that time happens.
At that time, and it kind of reminds you. It kind of pulls you out of the story and reminds you there's a mythic. There's a telling happening, which is quite interesting. It's that push and pull between the embodied phenomenological gestures that you were talking about, the tender story of love and agony of love, and the mythic story that he's also telling. I mean, okay, so go on. So you've got number 2, which was intertitles, I think.
Yeah.
And your third point was
the use of sound, the use of music, the way that voiceover, mainly voiceover and music. So non-diegetic sound intervene. You said this to me on WhatsApp, the obviousness of his musical choices and how like you think that would be a disaster. Like, and we often talk. It's like he's the master of like weaponizing cliche. Godard in every era of his work where he's good, and it's often a criticism people make of art that uses music. Oh well, I've heard that piece of music so many times, so like. Maybe if I hadn't heard that piece of music so often, I would think it was original, or I think I would like it. Godard completely sidesteps ever feeling that because he uses really obvious pieces of music all the time. They may not be
Beethoven,
Bach, and they're like Hail Mary, like doo-doo-doo. Like sometimes I don't even know these pieces of music, but I've heard them like literally on fucking The Simpsons. Do you know what I mean? Like they're like classic bits of drama that but he deploys them with such boldness. I think it's just I've said this on the pod before, like it's better to be obvious than original, and I think like he does obviousness with such self-awareness. It's absolutely phenomenal. I love it
because I think it's interesting. These are more consciously about music, these films as well, which is interesting because we see, particularly in Prenom Carmen, because we see Carmen is obviously a fucking Bizet opera, but we also see the quartet practicing, and then they're folded into part of the story. But normally music is used to manipulate the viewer. It's told you how to feel at this particular moment, right? And it's the stock in trade of teen Netflix dramas and stuff. It's like someone's having a heart-to-heart, so we get the swelling piano, sad music. It's supposed to set the scene for how you feel as a viewer, but here it kind of doesn't, because you might get very banal events occurring on screen. In Hail Mary, you get a girl just looking out the window and kind of playing with a Rubik's Cube, kind of distractedly, but you've got this intense fucking Dvorak just blasting fucking over the top of it, and it kind of stops before the scene stops. It's this asynchronized music, and for me that always indicates this slipping through of the sublime into the banal, the sacred interacting with the profane, and the profane interacting with the sacred in difficult ways, because like these films of this period, I think, are the sublime reaching out to normal profane life, and kind of being unable to understand it or engage with it properly, and profane life trying to seek meaning in the sublime and struggling and falling on its face as well. Hail Mary is a really good example of that. Because there's actually a parallel narrative where you've got a professor who's believed he has been able to identify creating original intelligence behind a universe, and he's kind of fucking one of his students. A bit confusing, and he's trying to find God. He believes he's isolated the electromagnetic signal released from a particular kind of organism. He calls it a bacteria, actually. So for him, God is a bacteria, but he believes he's identified a structuring intelligence behind life and the universe. But he's been outcast from his university. They say he's exiled. His life is just this kind of mess, and we see fragments of it, and he's just this disordered kind of character. He fails to find the sublime because he wants it, whereas Mary, who does not want the divine, she's just an ordinary girl, she's thrust upon her, trying to play basketball. The divine, the sublime, is thrust upon her. She does not want it, and the film resolves itself by kind of saying that to want something is counter to finding it. It's a very like weird Zen like theory that kind of Godard is pushing at this time for such a impassioned, brutal director in some ways. He's kind of saying no, to want to show something, to want to understand something is to fail. It will be thrust upon you, and you will then struggle to understand it, and that's the anguish of these films of these periods. And for him, it might not be about God. I think God is just the most convenient cliche, as it were. It's another one of his cliches. It's like the crime drama. It's just another one of the cliches. No, that's to do him discredit. I think he is having I think he is a sublime thinker.
No, it is sublime, but I think I don't think God comes into play in quite the way that like a kind of a religious leader who is offended by Hail Mary might think it would. But like I think that the way you're absolutely right about this Mary having this baby thrust upon her, it's like it creates in her this intensified ambivalence And all of Godard's best work, I mean, Vivre sa vie is a perfect precursor to this, you know, about like a woman who starts doing prostitution and her ambivalence and her like desire, but like her repulsion and the decisions she makes and the kind of decisions she doesn't feel she's making, and you know, all of that sort of weird mixture. You know, that's what film is uniquely placed to capture, you know, because film doesn't provide an internal monologue. Film doesn't tell you what people's motivations are. It just shows you their actions. And I think these films are like masterful depictions of that ambivalence, particularly Hail Mary, because she becomes, you know, so like all the things she says, like when she says, oh, you know, he's like, why didn't you kiss me? And she's like, I do kiss you. And the moments when she draws his sexual, you know, his hand in, I mean, there's something I want to say about feminism. Always a worrying sign.
The Joe Rogan experience has begun.
but I just want to mention the lipstick, because that's another amazing moment of ambivalence.
At the end of
the very end of Hail Mary, she you know, she's had the baby. Spoiler alert! She's had the baby. She's happy. The baby is kind of like a messiah. And she's just in the car on her own, and the angel Gabriel sort of like, you know, kind of catcalls her basically, and then she sits in her car. She pulls out this lipstick and she looks as if she's not gonna use a lipstick, and then she decides to use a lipstick, and it's shot in various different cuts, some of it out of focus, some of it in focus, and it's like this heavenly moment where she decides, and I don't really like symbolism and meaning or whatever, but like, you know, she's deciding she's gonna fuck, you know, that she's
DTF at this
she's
point.
maybe gonna be a prostitute.
You see her,
you know, like the putting on the lipstick means she's like embracing her fleshy bodily form. You know, she's no longer just a kind of a soulful, like, you know, a virgin.
The holy
she's no longer a virgin.
Yeah. And that's the kind of the ambivalence you were talking about structures this film, and even the ambivalence of the Godhead that is reaching out. You know, Gabriel, you mentioned Uncle Gabriel, who's accompanied by a small, precociously intelligent child. Gabriel is this kind of, he continues the typical, again, the Godardian character type of the kind of insane interloper. You know, a lot, especially in this series of films, you get the kind of mad interloper into a world for whom chaos and disorder are kind of a norm, and they create there's a lot of irrational pushing and pulling. In you know, it's Lemmy Caution in Alphaville, who enters Alphaville and just chucks shit around and kicks people over and just generally causes chaos. It's that character. Here, you know, he turns up to Mary's and he's just shouting and yelling, and he keeps pushing Joseph around. He holds Joseph's head down like a dog. He goes, no, because Joseph is trying to touch her. He's like, no, this is the law. And he's kind of this avuncular character, but he's not a kindly person. He's this chaotic, weird figure. I think it comes back to, because Godard... No, let's go back to the lipstick. You're right, because he catcalls her. It's great. You hear the church bells, and he kind of catcalls her. He's like, hey, lady, what the fuck? And he says, Hail Mary. And it's done with such kind of like irony, and, you know, like it almost means nothing. Like the holiness almost means nothing. And when you actually see the kid, the Messiah, he's just almost this Damien-like figure. He's quite a weird little child, you know, because he's got the burden, and he kind of like quotes bits of Jesus from the New Testament at his parents, and they're like, no, stop that. It's very good. It's got that thing. He's done the tender thing, and it could be a very pious, holy film about you know, God is with us in the modern age, but it's not, because Godard is still making jokes. Yeah,
and I guess it's kind of more about women's role in society, and whether a woman can, you know, because she plays basketball, and the irony in that basketball is that like basketball is like a bloke's game, really. Like netball's the more girly version. She's doing a kind of, she's being a jock basically. She's like tall, she's a bit horsey, like she's playing but then again, they're all wearing these really short like shorts, and like it is.
I think that's
being
quite. It's not
sexualized
though.
It's not sexualized, but it's on that kind of knife edge of being like right. A lot of the things that happen and a lot of things she does are like when she's getting her pussy examined by the gynecologist guy. Like it's like it's not sexual, but it's like so close to being sexual.
And you're complicit. It problematizes your own God.
You're watching it thinking like,
you're watching it, but he's not doing it in. It's kind of hot. And he's not doing it in a culture wars way. He's doing it in a. It's not to like go, oh, actually, you were aroused by that, so you're bad. He's saying you're aroused by that because this is sex. This is an erotic drama.
That's he's bringing the erotic into the spiritual,
into the holy.
That's why it upset all the priests, I'm sure, because they all had hard-ons.
They had massive rages. I mean, that's the thing, because the Catholic Church in particular has always been erotic. The worship of the Virgin Mary and the worship of the Virgin has always been sexualized. This is a highly erotic activity, the church, not only when it diddles kids. But actually, it's funny, there was a bomb plot against this film. Supposedly there was the threat of a bomb being sent to the Jean-Luc Godard films production office.
What a legend. That like lead to, I suppose it's France, they love a good bomb.
It's France, they love bombing. And also he was at Berlin, I think, Berlin Film Festival. He was pied. He was cream pied, lads. There's a good video, pie in the face. It's actually, I shared the video the other day, but it got lost in a mix of messages. But it was actually caught on camera. Sort of shitty VHS news camera, but he gets pie, and it's Jean-Luc Godard, so he does a little interview and he's just like licking the pie off his face and eating it and looks very happy. And he says something, but the video I saw wasn't translated, so we may throw the video out there into the ether, and if any of our delightful followers speak French, if they could translate what Jean-Luc Godard says, I would absolutely die to hear it.
We'll read it out on the fourth Godard show.
Yeah, we will. But yeah, so the controversy here is he was eroticizing something, mixing the sacred and the profane. And it's interesting because Prénom Carmen, again, he is taking another very famous opera, probably one of the most famous operas, by Bizet, 1875. And he is making it absurd. He's setting it in modern day France. I actually think that do you agree with this? I felt like Prénom Carmen had the most weekend energy in it. Yes.
Yeah, because of the way it sort of deploys violence in quite a... I mean, there is something odd about the way Godard does violence. Like the way he does... It's like, it is a bit like an opera in a way. It's got a strange stilted theatrical approach where it's just clearly a bunch of people who've been ordered around to do stuff. He does like mass violence in the way that like pornographers do sex. Like it's just so like kind of brash and yet functional.
Pumping.
The way the way that the bank, and that's what's so amazing in the bank robbery scene at the towards the start of Prénom Carmen. Just for listeners who haven't seen Prénom Carmen, like one of the central plot lines of I called it a subplot in the intro, but like it because it's not as important as the romance, but it precedes the romance. Is this bank robbery that very glamorous girl Carmen is part of this crew of bank robbers, and there's a sort of shootout where she runs into this security guard who's armed, who's been gunning down some of her comrades, and she's got a gun, and one of them's got a gun, and the gun fails, and then they chase and they fall down some steps, and they sort of roll around in fight, but then the rolling around in fight becomes very intimate and sexual, and then the rest of the film is their sort of very anguished romance while he's he goes on trial for collaborating in the bank robbery, and I mean, you see that in Tout va bien as well, with the cops running into the Carrefour after everyone's stolen everything. It is this kind of orchestrated violence that
controlled chaos.
Controlled chaos. I mean, it's a perfect contradiction, isn't it?
It's you've got the indifference of the cleaner, who, while people are laying around in their own blood, is just mopping the blood up.
That's very weekend. That is very weekend.
It's very weekend. There's also the bit when he's kind of like, it repeats the scene where he runs down this corridor firing off his gun kind of at nothing. And there's a guy on the floor. There's someone dead. there's someone like weeping, and there's a guy who's just putting numbers into a calculator lying on the floor, and it repeats it twice, and he kind of falls over a cabinet. And again, I always think there's something interesting because you mentioned about gesture, and immediately when you say gesture in French film, I think Bresson. But obviously Bresson was like no actors, no staging in a way, or total staging from him, but no acting from his characters. And I think in a way, like Godard kind of manages that. It's much more controlled. Obviously Godard's control here, it's a very studied, almost manneristic way of deploying it, but there's a kind of weird synergy, I hate to use that word, but synergy between them. But one thing with the violence, is it is indifferent. Before that, for Godard's violence is always way harder hitting than the sheer brutality and indifference of it. Is way harder hitting than a film that is going for, a film like classically Spielberg doing Saving Private Ryan, a film which kind of like pushed the envelope for what was considered acceptable in terms of depicting violence in Hollywood film. It's a kind of largely forgettable film, and its violence is forgettable. Even at the time, it was like, oh god, this is the new frontier of gore in cinema. But the violence is unforgettable because it's sentimentalized. It's like, oh, my buddy's dead, let's have a 5-minute cry sesh. Whereas in Godard, it's literally just gunning a motherfucker down.
But then it becomes sentimental in this really profound way. Like they, on both occasions, the bank robbers. Have like the bank robbery or the shoot up has this kind of cold violence that then turns into tenderness.
Yeah.
And from coming out of coldness, it feels even warmer and more powerful. It's kind of extraordinary that.
It is extraordinary how it ricochets between those poles. It's not middle of the road, it doesn't stay. I think obviously it's quite close to the story of Carmen.
What do you think about the bit where he just like goes into the shower and like
wanks off
on
a leg? It's quite incredible. It's quite shocking because in a way, like
I've never seen anything like that in a film. Maybe
no,
I have,
either.
But it was just quite something about the way it was done. Like it's kind of too pathetic to be a full-on rape. It's just like this, and I know he's not got a hard on. I don't know if that's like it. I guess it's
Could
like
you in front of a. Jean-Luc Godard
I always think this is a very move to comment to make, but like,
could you get a stiffy?
But like actors in non-pornographic film don't tend to get erect.
No, they use cock stand-in, I think.
And sometimes they use like a prosthetic cock.
Breyer, for example,
like Breyer in Fat Girl. Some of her films she uses real pornographic actors like Rocco Siffredi, but but. So sometimes there are some sex scenes in films where the cock is not erect, and you sort of think, well, it kind of would be in this situation.
It's almost not about sex. It's his own.
But in this shot, it's almost like he is not. It's that sort of He's trying to recapture this flame. He's also trying to punish her, but none of it is coming. None of it is coming to life.
Literally.
Yeah, it's sort of this real pathetic.
Because she abandons him basically in favor of her. In Carmen, it's a bullfighter.
Right, right.
She abandons him for he is a soldier. In Carmen, she's a kind of fiery gypsy character.
Right. I had no knowledge of the opera Carmen. I should have done some research before this pod, but
it's all right.
I was happy enough. I assumed the film was so loosely based on it that it would just confuse things to try and find out about the opera.
It's pretty tightly based on it. There's not much in the skeleton is the same broadly. And Carmen was quite a revolutionary opera in its own right. Like I always say, it's about things that happen in like the late 19th century or 20th century, like Rite of Spring, but it scandalized audiences at the time. I could scandalize an audience. I wish I could scandalize some of it. It scandalized audiences. It was. It took a long time for Carmen to become like the staple of opera that it has become. Like Bizet died. I think on like the 33rd performance of it, unaware that it would become this like juggernaut in opera. Like Carmen is always fucking on. It's just one of those things.
Who could you scandalize these days though, really? Like the people you'd get
Hannah Gadsby.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? Like,
but like the Netflix woke. But no, you can't, because they're already ready to be scandalized over everything. Like, it would be very hard to. I think you'd have to. The only way to scandalize someone is to deconstruct a dearly cherished norm, and I don't think people have those anymore. You know?
I don't know. I think we do have norms. We have we have loads of conformity and stuff that we're not really aware of. I mean, no one ever really is aware of their conformity.
Child porn. There we go. That's scandalous. That's the final frontier.
I mean, that's the thing. You could just pick something awful. Like,
you could pick something taboo, but I mean, there is something. There's something in our society right now that, like, if you look back on like 2021, right? Like, I just wonder what the works will be, the artworks that scandalized society. I don't know,
because none of the sort of up and coming contemporary artists are making. I'm not saying that something has to scandalize contemporary society to be good, but if you look back on any era, there will be people doing extraordinary work.
Well, you have I think the scandal comes from legitimacy now. Like, the scandal comes from legitimacy. It's like, this is not a X, like, this is not music. We're actually back to really basic questions about love him or hate him. Someone like Jordan Wolfson has managed to, I guess, scandalize people a bit, but a lot of it came down to, this isn't really art though, is it? Like, internet art can often scandalize. Amalia Ullman, sorry, you've got these kind of people that, but again, it comes down to
scandalize.
They don't scandalize. No, it's just, it frustrates people within that clique, within that world, and they're going, well, it's not.
But then they make loads of money and loads of people buy it. I don't think any.
Exactly.
No,
I mean,
Godard,
whatever.
Maybe this
God's
is a bit
still alive though, you know. So
yeah, I mean, he's still making
one more in him.
He's definitely got one more in him.
Can we talk about? Can you talk about Hélas pour moi? Because you said to me, you did a very glib intro, which I loved, but you're like, it's baffling or whatever word you used. So what was your reaction to Hélas pour moi? Because I know we've been neglecting it. It's the elephant in the room.
It is the elephant in the room. Well, very well put. I mean,
take your time.
Hélas pour moi is... what I recall of it is like lots of green landscapes, lots of these Pizarro-ish. I mean, in a lot of the films, there's the kind of Pizarro, like vistas of French countryside. This is Swiss countryside in Hélas pour moi. When I read the Wikipedia synopsis for Hélas pour moi today, having watched it last night for the second time, I was just like so baffled, because almost nothing of what was in the Wikipedia synopsis felt like something I saw in that film.
No, the Wikipedia synopsis is not helpful.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I just watched it and I was loving bits of it and kind of letting it glaze over me. And I thought the way that the sound panned, you got different voices coming in on left and right. The way images come in is so beautiful. The opening is just like, it's just one of the best openings to any film ever. It's just extraordinary the way that story is told in this repetitious way, and then you have this amazing tracking shot that glides into this like a beautiful shot of this girl like watching over the lake. But this is the thing. I'm not challenging you for it's not like the Hodorowski episode. Like I'm not challenging you. I'm wondering. I'm admiring you for liking it. Like when you put that in your top 10.
God, that's right.
When you put that in your top 10, Hélas pour moi, I was like, fucking legend, because like I aspire to like be able to just bathe in that film, because there are
you're supposed to bathe.
So many extraordinary moments to it.
You were supposed to bathe in Hélas pour moi because the asynchronicity, the use of intertitles, the abruptness of his editing style here. And I got shit for talking about Pissarro the other day, but it's true. Like, this is actually in some ways Godard is most mannered. Obviously recalling that Pissarro was like, of the Impressionists, kind of considered a bit of a fuddy-duddy, and his paintings excelled in this grisaille that's kind of grey. I mean, this whole era of Godard, by the way, is like deeply painterly. Deeply painterly, right? And it's like, whereas, say, Prenom and maybe Hail Mary it kind of excel in this piss yellow often. and these very studied rooms, depictions of fruit and vegetables, still lifes. Here, you've got it's on the Swiss lakes. Remembering that Godard is Swiss or half Swiss. With À la Pomois, it's similar to Hail Mary. It is a story about God supposedly fucking a woman, taking on the form of her boyfriend, her partner, and fucking her. And like Carmen, it is a myth, kind of a legendary story, because this is Greek mythology. Zeus coming down from the heavens, taking on the body of a swan or whatever, or a bull, and fucking someone for some unknown reason. Plot-wise, it's baffling, it's confusing, it's kind of like a murder mystery. There's like man who wants to decipher what's happened. It's kind of playing with genre, but again, in such a sublime and abstract way. This is as close as Godard gets to, I think, pure cinematic expressionism within the confines of his impressionistic, limitations of film, without going full brackage on the world. He's extremely expressionistic here in his editing style, and that's what I love about this film. It's what pulls me in. It's arresting, it's deeply watchable. I watched it without subtitles, not that I speak French, but today I was like scrubbing and just enjoying the look. There's these Depardieu, there's these kind of grating, gravelly voiceovers, which kind of pulls you back to Alphaville in a way, with the computer kind of going on. There's all this like great shit happening in it. It is about, I think there was a thing I read, maybe it was on Wikipedia or somewhere else, but saying, the script began life with Godard taking a train in Switzerland and thinking he wanted to make a film about God travelling on a train and watching the struggles of humanity from the train windows. He drove through all these places, and it turned out to be impossible to do because it would be a bit heavy on the special effects, not really his thing. But this is again what I was saying earlier, the ambivalence of God or the gods trying to observe and interact with humanity, humanity trying to find the sublime and react to the sublime, both of them failing, the beauty being in the failure.
And that's why it's part of his Sublime era for us.
Yeah, we should name this is the Sublime. This is like Godard, the Sublime.
I was going to call it the sexy era, but maybe we should call it the Sublime era.
It is sexy though, isn't it? There's a
it
lot
is
of
like it's as we said earlier, it's combining the sexy with the sublime, which is like the most sacrilegious thing to do, right? Because the Sublime should be all about virginity and sanctity and chastity.
Yeah, and not the penetration. Like this is ladies and lads, if you like tits, watch these films. For no other reason. If you want to watch some like some great erotic cinema, great tits, lots of ass. He's actually very good here because he Godard also. Who's afraid of the male gaze?
Our new tagline. Which we finally found a good tagline for this podcast on iTunes and Spotify.
And we're doing it now.
And we challenge you. Who is afraid of the male? Because we will just sit here. We're both straight men.
We talk about boobs.
We're not afraid anymore.
Out the closet. But no, truly, but here he isn't like. You might think, okay, well, in a lot of his films, it's like the woman is the object of desire, and is depicted naked often. But men are equally shown very naked in these films, particularly Prénom Carmen. We see, like you said, there's a scene when he kind of goes into the shower. That's his humiliation.
But there's a scene where he just touches her cunt.
For sure,
it's so extraordinary. I mean, I was sort of like, you kind of touch these people's bodies with your eyes.
Yeah.
And then you watch men touch them with their hands. It's very it's deeply horny what he's doing.
Oh, for sure.
But it's just the grabbing and the touching and the the kissing,
the grazing, and the people are not in maybe even in the 60s, but his films in the 60s, but here love is not given. There is never a scene where love is completely consensual and compassionate. There's a kiss in Prénom Carmen towards the end when they're in the hotel room before she abandons him.
Oh, like a death kiss. Yeah, it's a bit like the end of Matador. The kind of
the
sort of the tiny death and the slightly bigger death kind of coming at once.
But then there's a lot of a kiss will suddenly break into violence. They'll push each other over. They'll try and tear each other's clothes off. They'll push each other away. They'll grab each other's hair. The tenderness is always
fraught, because that's
fraught. Yeah,
what love is like. That's what heterosexuality for sure is like.
Love is Battlefield. Pat Benatar.
Yeah.
Sucking, fucking, and shucking. You know,
oysters.
Can you talk to me about Godard himself? Talk to me about Godard himself, because he appears in Prenom Carmen.
He appears in Prenom Carmen in the most inane way that I love. But
it's just great, isn't it? It's so bizarre. What do you think that is?
It's very nice of him to just position. I mean, he's playing himself as a filmmaker who's the uncle of this stunner, Carmen, and he's sort of trying to isolate. It's a funny one where he's like trying to isolate himself in a mental asylum and playing this kind of father to what's going on. It's very charming. It's very eccentric. I think it's really honest. I think it's really like, you know, Godard does, the male leads in Godard's films are not usually the characters he would identify with. There's a funny passage I read somewhere that, or maybe it was on the commentary on one of the files, that if a character in a Godard film is called Paul, that's the cipher for Godard.
Really?
And there are certain Pauls that appear. Some of them are even called Paul Godard.
Isn't Père Le Fou a Paul?
No, he's a Fernando.
Is he Fernando? Of course he is.
But Paul, the Piccoli's character in Le Mépris, who's the filmmaker with the actress, is called Paul.
Yep.
And so there are certain, and I think Gabriel. Someone said Angel Gabriel is more the person he identifies with in Hail Mary rather than Joseph.
Well, that Gabriel does direct
exactly
Mary in that film, and often Joseph physically direct them. It's weird because he yeah, go on.
No, go on.
You first. No, with Godard in his film, he's trying to be in his mental home. He is supposedly working on a script, and there's a very caring nurse who kind of becomes this kind of companion. Who's often with him, while he kind of spouts this baffling nonsense, often, funnily enough, commenting on his own cinematic legacy. And there's a bit where they talk about Mao. Obviously, Godard had a Maoist period in film in the 70s. Sadly, famously. Wherever you think about it, but there's a bit where he says, everyone's over Mao now. Mao's not interesting, but he was a good cook. He fed all of China. And there's these really great bits where he kind of comments on his own. This is Godard. You know, Godard's, he's again being metafictional, metatextual, and putting himself in his film, and it's self-aware as film. It goes back to that Woolen article where, you see the camera, you see the shadow of the boom. That's Godard commenting on film and production.
So much more class the way he does it in these films.
He's grown. He's all grown up. He's learned how to do what Woolen is saying in the 70s well.
I was thinking last week or this week, the other day. We were very harsh on Godard's political turn. But I did spend 3 years working for Novara Media, and I worked for Corbyn and the UK Black Lives Matter. I'm not showing off here. I worked for loads of woke activist groups
as a
videographer, which is basically like that's not really any worse than what Godard was doing. Like trying to use your technical skills to like change the world through.
That's part of youth. I distrust propaganda. Anyone who doesn't have that on their
It's
resume,
just weird that he had that after making a bunch of sick films in the 60s.
Yeah, but that was why he did it, because he was his critique. He realized his critique of Hollywood, his deconstruction of Hollywood, films like Père Le Fou and Weekend, was too indebted still to
these imperialist
Hollywood.
worldviews.
The imperialist worldview, the Hollywood Moss film complex. They easily called it. Like, it was too indebted to that. So if he was sincere, truly believed what he was doing, so had to destroy further. So one of the
master's tools must be used when you're a filmmaker.
Must be used.
This is our new tagline.
We love the master's tools.
We don't really care about dismantling the master's house. We quite like it, and also use the master's tools.
What I like to do at the end of the day is I come back from work. I like to hang the master's. Thanks, Audrey. I like to hang the master's tools on the wall of my master's house. It's weird because he realized he needs to go he needs to go deeper. He needed to deconstruct further. What I like about Godard, why he's one of my favorite filmmakers, is because he's completely sincere. He was willing to it would have been very easy for Godard to continue making films like of Le Mépris, and people would have said Godard is an accomplished, mature filmmaker who makes serious art house films about meaning and love and anguish, and that, we love that. That's great. Here's a palm d'or. But he was like, no, I'm going to completely fucking obliterate. I'm going to carpet bomb all I've done for the last 10 years. I'm going to destroy that. I'm going to break it apart, and I'm going to come back. And what does he do? He comes back in the 80s, 83 to 93, and he makes masterwork after masterwork. To do fucking Prenom Carmen, Hail Mary, 2 years apart. Nobody could ever do that now. No one is creating films of that quality, that caliber, that much beauty, and still be that experimentally daring. Because to watch them, they're irregular. I think again, you mentioned the scene where he goes into the shower with her, and this is kind of rape scene almost, but it's so simultaneously violent, shocking, beautiful, pathetic, sublime. Who the fuck else could do that, man? No one can do that. No one can do that. He was operating on a level far above anyone else for far longer. I respect that he blew his shit up, came back and did better. It's a good lesson on everyone who's in a creative rut. Just destroy what you're doing. I mean, and also so amazing that
Prenom, I'm torn between your top 10 Godard, your film by Godard that's in your top 10 is Hélas pour moi. I respect that. It's not in mine. I'm torn between Prénom Carmen and Hail Mary. I put Hail Mary in my top 10 the other day, but
I think
but for listeners, we have this odd ritual with this WhatsApp group we're in of making lists of top 10 films that we sometimes change. And I took Vivre sa vie out, and I added.
You love Vivre sa vie as well.
I love Vivre sa vie, but when I saw slightly less. When I saw the Godard political films, I liked Vivre sa vie a bit less because I realised that he'd started when he did all those stats about prostitution during the bit where she decides to be a hooker. I realised he was learning how to make propaganda in Vivre sa vie, and it made me like Vivre sa vie less. But I love Vivre sa vie. Vivre sa vie is so tender and beautiful.
It's so good, so tender.
However, Hail Mary is Hail Mary. With top tens, you can't just put you can't just put the films you most want to watch all the time, or you can't just put
almost not
the best films. You have to have some area of representation, not in a diversity way necessarily, but representation of what you feel cinema can do. And I really want, in my top 10, I really want to point to these two films, Prénom Carmen and Hail Mary, that we're discussing tonight, and I want to say I love cinema because cinema can do this.
Yeah, that's the function of a list, actually. And I think, that's again, it comes back to that question of there are certain filmmakers who, again, Tarkovsky being the kind of golden child in a way, and a lot of people talk about Tarkovsky, and there's a lot of disagreement over which Tarkovsky film is the most superior. Pretty much everyone agrees that Solaris is his weakest film. I think that's very fair.
Except the people who say it's their favourite.
Exactly, apart from people who are fucking wrong. But for me, Sacrifice for me was the closest to the Sublime, and Anguished for Tarkovsky. But you feel differently because you're Mirror?
Well, actually, I Stalker, but I was thinking of switching to Mirror.
I mean, Mirror is phenomenal, more film.
Because again, I think Mirror is closer to what my ambition for cinema is. Mirror is more startling, more devastating, more extraordinary. Whereas Stalker is a bit more conventional. It's still quite unconventional, but
the more we think about Stalker, it is conventional. But it's a lot of people's access point to Tarkovsky in for art film, and the value of that, the amount of
But they're both bold films, actually. I would like to. I think it is the best films are these films that try and do something that just. If someone said to you at a party, "Oh, I'm gonna do a remake of Hail Mary," and it's she gets. It's a gas station people be like, what the fuck, and the same with Stalker. Oh, I'm going to do a film about these guys that go to a place and any wish they want happens in the place, and it's a bit of a struggle. Or Mirror, I'm just going to do bits from my childhood and some other stuff that's quite beautiful.
You can't reduce these films to blurbs, though. I am anti-blurb.
Anyone would just be like, oh, that sounds like a bit crap, you're probably going to fail. It's that level of mad ambition that creates these works that are just simply unforgettable.
Well, this is it, and even when we talked a while back maybe about the stranglehold of an adaptation. Any adaptation that tries to kind of exactly copy the story will probably be bound to fail, because it is trying to be a thing it's not. It is what Bresson called, almost the stranglehold, the terror of theatre. It says film's dependence on theatre, and you could say film's dependence on literature is another thing. It's like, but you can be like that thing. You can speak to it. Tarkovsky with Stalker, the Strugatsky's novel is nothing like Stalker the film. Absolutely not at all. They're not even comparable. Largely because Stalker has one joke in it, whereas Roadside Picnic is full of jokes. It's a funny book. It's like the Heinlein era of Panther science fiction. It is funny. It's a funny
when
book.
I read the Stalker book after having seen Stalker like 6 times. And counting. I didn't. It's one of the rare occasions of reading an adaptation after a film and not picturing the film at all.
Yeah,
like all of the imagery I
was
imagining
testament.
Was like a different film.
Totally different. You can't. They're not even comparable, which is great. But yeah, to take it back to Godard. Yeah, Godard is an adapter at this period.
He's like fascinated by the big stories.
The big stories, which is great because the film is the perfect medium to tackle the big stories, because you've got quite a lot of you can activate a couple of senses at once, which is more than a book can do. Walter Ong, fuck off. There is only one sense with a book, which is eyesight. But it's you can activate a couple of senses at the same time. You've got the canvas. The whole world is your canvas. It's the study of humans, or people. That's what film really is. People in place and people among other people. That's really what it is. But that's what's so appealing about Godard at this time. And we struggle to talk about Helen pour moi, and I kind of don't want to talk about it anymore because there's not really much to say. It is, ultimately, a lot of the film rests on a deconstructive approach to narrative, because it's really about what really happened. It questions whether the central conceit of the film happened, which is whether God did fuck the woman in this guy's form. That's kind of the central problematic of it.
Was it you or was it him? Capital H.
Him, yeah, capital him. His tumescent majesty.
I do want to say something. I do want to do a shout out to the short film that frequently precedes Hail Mary, The Book of Mary, by Anne-Marie Mieville. There are one doesn't, because he was working with her quite a lot, and living with her. They collaborated on a few things together, and I think she wrote Prenom Carmen,
she was a writer for Prenom Carmen. She might also have been she was the editor of Hail Mary as well.
Well, all of this is to say, I don't want to speculate which way the influence went. I think they were clearly quite a big influence on each other. I didn't realize. I don't think you realized either while watching the Book of Mary until it was finished that it was a discrete piece by a different director. Now that I know that, I can sort of see certain differentiations, but it is such a beautiful short film.
Fuck yes,
it is extraordinary. Yeah. I mean, it is.
You were really taken by the dance scene, weren't you?
The Mahler dance scene at the end is this amazing, organic, unselfconscious piece of expression by a child actor who's completely in the zone. It's shot with such gorgeous restraint. The color hues of the whole thing are just so warm and brown and green and natural, and the way it handles this classic story of two parents, separating and handling a child, is in a short space of time. When I talk about short films, we had an episode about short films.
We did, yeah.
Short films fucking suck. Not because you can't make a good film in that space of time, but because people try and cram things that shouldn't be in that size into that size, or they just sort of abandon any attempt to say something filmic at all. And what this film does, which it just makes it look so easy. It's just a short film. It's just, some compelling drama that only lasts 25 minutes.
25 minutes, yeah.
And it's there, and it happens, and it tease up Hail Mary so well, not least because the main character, the child, is called Mary, and you have some kind of feeling that she might grow up to be the Mary in the film. Although
childhood.
It's not that she's not that Mary, but
she's not. No,
it's sort of there in some way. She actually feels a bit like she feels a little bit like the angel. It's different actors, but like the angel's assistant, the little child.
Actually, the parallel between them is this precocious child, because she kind of quotes Baudelaire, and she interacts with her parents through this kind of again quite Godardian, you know, the metatextual nature of Godard, where the words in your world are not enough. The failure of communication is that you rely on established texts and genres and things. So the kid is often like precociously quoting, you know, things far too clever for their age.
I mean, that's the mad thing. I don't know, and I've literally not read a book ever. So all of this literature stuff.
This is an illiterate.
It's kind of lost on me. It isn't true.
All this reading shit.
But like, I don't. You know, you've read a lot more than I have, and a lot of these references. You know, but it's still. I still manage to absorb some of that beauty, and I think
you don't need to almost.
It's sort of like when I read The Wasteland. You know, I really loved The Wasteland when I first read it, and I didn't know what any of the references were to. I just thought they all sounded
still bangs.
The words just sounded good, you know. But I know that like as years go on, and I sort of find out more about the stories that these films are based on, and also just have more life experience, I'll get even more out of those films. They are, it's true of Tarkovsky's work as well. Like the best films, you look forward to seeing them again in 5 years' time.
Yes.
When you've lived 5 more years and you've read and watched and listened to 5 more years of beautiful music, films and books.
When I first, you're right, you know, when I first saw Tarkovsky, I think, when I saw Stalker, which again was my first Tarkovsky, I wasn't there for the Sublime Tarkovsky, or the Tarkovsky that's trying to talk to God, the holy Tarkovsky. I was there for kind of the cool premise, in a way, you know, this wasteland, you're there for the effect, rather than the impulse behind it, the actual real premise, which is like the inability to really seize what you want, or to identify what you want, which is what the film's really about, right? And in the horror of saying about. There's a really good quote actually from there's lots of good quotes from there's a couple of things in Prenom Carmen. Godard himself says, and his assistant, nurse, writes it down. He says, "Beauty is only the start of bearable terror." And the idea of Godard's bearable terror is way more interesting to me than the idea of controlled chaos. This is bearable terror. I like to kind of flip those things out.
Wait, so what's controlled chaos in relation?
Well, we're talking about in the kind of the weekend. It's a staged phenomenon that is absurd and slipping,
constructed and orchestrated.
Structured and orchestrated, but also really violent and unpredictable. But here it's kind of the alternative is bearable terror, and that's life. Life is bearable terror. It's something we do, and most people don't choose the kind of, as it were, easy or difficult way out. Most people kind of stick through until they die, and every day it presents things that are filled with terror. Decisions about your job, relationships, what are you doing like with your life? That's the terror. The bearableness is you living it, and what makes you persevere, beauty, kind of failed grasp at the sublime at sunset, mist passing over the mountain, the taste of coffee, I don't know, like that's the bearable terror, that ambivalence, and that is Godard.
You're such a poet.
Don't fucking call me that. I'm actually Rupi Kaur. I'm Rupi Kaur. That's the real reveal of this is I am Rupi Kaur. Thank you very much. There's another line actually in Prenom Carmen,
in Milk and Honey.
In Milk and Honey. Milk me honey, which is the thing that a lot of people say. It's the refrain of the film in Prénom Carmen is regardez-moi, look at me. People keep saying it to each other, look at me, and it's said so many times. I was like, at first you're like, okay, this once, but it's kept fucking happening.
We've got to wrap up soon, I think.
We have, but that's the terror. There's so much in these films in a way that was so little, really, so much like epiphenomenal content, and like the revolutionary period. In these films, because again, this is the value of sublime film, or film that tries to be sublime. There is so much here. All of life is here.
Extraordinary films. I really implore listeners to seek out these films, all three of them. Prenom Carmen, Hail Mary, including the little short by his wife, partner, whatever.
The short is important.
And Hélas pour moi, from 1993. Torrent them. I know he's still alive, but there isn't really any other way to, like, if you live in America, you can get the Blu-rays, but
or Criterion Collection online, like the Criterion Channel, whatever it's called.
Do they have them?
I don't know.
I think other organisations have the rights to these films.
Is it Gaumont? Whoever Gaumont distributes.
I think Studio Canal have them, but I don't know. They're sort of
they are. They must be Studio Canal, actually. Thinking
because of that beautiful. I'm so used to that sting.
It's such a better opening than the Criterion Channel's kind of silent.
Oh, the little
wheel. The only other one that really stirs me is the Moss film.
Oh, of course it stirs.
Like the heroic.
Fucking tanky.
No, I'm Ricky Cow.
Joining us next week to discuss another set of films made in 1980s France. The films of Maurice Pialat is poet Paige Murphy, friend of the show. We're looking forward to that very much. We'll be reviewing. I think we should tell people which films we're reviewing next week so that they can watch them.
Yeah, we don't do that, do we? Yeah, the spill.
We're watching Anos Amor and Enfance Nuée, Naked Childhood. Be careful about Googling that.
Yeah, don't. I wouldn't suggest doing that.
And go for the French Enfance Nuée and put the director's
Then you'll be
name.
on a French fucking pedo list.
Yeah. No, they don't have pedo lists because they're
it's encouraged. You get the Legion d'honneur.
The list is a list of commendation.
Macron comes to your house, shakes your hand.
And Sous le Soleil de Satan, which was booed at Cannes for winning the Palme d'Or.
It's a very good film, actually. That one. That's the one I've seen. So.
Oh, is it? You've seen it? Great. Okay. I'm looking forward to seeing that very much. I might watch it tonight. Thank you for listening, listeners. Watch mid-career Godard. Never lose hope.
Hands, face, place, space.
Bum.